Hello everybody, JGC Anime here, and today we are going to be reviewing Sword Oratoria. Is it wrong to try to pick up girls in a dungeon on the side? Or Dungeoni de wo Matemaru no wa Michikadaru Daruka Gaiden Sword Oratoria. I probably said that wrong. Well, let's roll with this. So, this is the first ever spin-off for, I think it's the only right now spin-off, of Is It Wrong to Try to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon, a series that I absolutely love. I think it's definitely one of my favorite series of all time, and I decided I'd check out this spin-off a while back, and I thought it was actually very enjoyable, so I wondered, is it still the same now? And so I gave it a rewatch, and today I'm here to share my opinion. So, without further ado, let's just hop right into this. So, what is the story summary of this spin-off? The spin-off is basically the first season, but told through eyes and this new character who was in the original series but never said a word, Lafia, their adventures in the Loki Familia, and along with their crew. And that's basically the whole thing. It's just their adventures throughout the course of the first season of Danmachi, but through their perspective. And yeah, a lot of different stuff happens. It definitely does feel like a new adventure in some areas. It does have a few issues here and there, but I'll go into that later. And yeah, so moving on past that, some spoiler-free thoughts. I actually enjoyed the series decently enough. Not as much as the main series, though. Maybe it's just because of how the series was handled with this spin-off, but it just didn't feel the same. And I don't know, I guess you could say I was thinking of it would be similar to the series A Certain Scientific Railgun, which was a spin-off of A Certain Magical Index. I was hoping maybe it'd be something like that, but it wasn't, and again, I'll go into that later. But I didn't enjoy it as much as I did the main series stuff. It's just, I didn't feel as much enjoyment and excitement watching this, where even though it was Ai's perspective throughout the first season, and we got a bit more like on her side along with this new character, Lafia, who honestly kind of sucked in the beginning. She got better by the end, but she kind of sucked in the beginning for me at least. And I feel like this series had some potential, but it had a lot of rough areas that made it a lot harder to watch. There was still some stuff I absolutely loved, mainly for the comedy bits of it. Like this one character named Tione is like heavily crushing on the Loki Familia's like group leader, one of the group leaders, Finn, who is like this little guy who is actually really smart. So I'm guessing maybe he's like I don't actually remember what his species is, but I think he's similar to I don't know, but basically he's just small but really smart and strong. And that was a little comedy bit that wasn't in the original Danmachi that I thought was really funny, and her reactions to literally anybody talking bad about him or just kind of shrouding him, it's just her absolute like hardcore love for him is so hilarious, and I really enjoyed that, although it was kinda like not very used in the grand scheme of things. There were also characters I was surprised I actually found to like a lot more in this series. Like, there's this character named Bet, who's like this wolf guy, and when I first watched Danmachi, I hated him. I thought he was just a rude jerk who didn't understand where to push his boundaries, and I just thought he was just rude in every single way. But then, after rewatching all this, I realized he's actually not a bad guy. He's just, he's kind of like a tsundere in a way. And that's made me respect his character a lot more as well, and honestly, he's probably my favorite character in this spin-off, as even though he doesn't have much, he has shown that he is strong. Even if he's not much, like, shown in the show, he doesn't have much screen time. And I do like the fact that we do get a bit more information on Ice's backstory, but we still haven't got enough for me. Like, I mentioned this, I think, in a previous review, that I really want to know more about Ai's and her character. But we still haven't got much on that, despite the fact this spin-off was meant to focus mainly on her perspective and everyone, the Loki Familia, but it still wasn't bad. I wouldn't say it's bad. It's more of it could have been better, but I wish that it still gave me some satisfaction, but I wish that there was more to it. But yeah, so I think that's all I can really say without spoiling too much. So I'm going to hop into the spoiler section now. Here's a timestamp to when the spoiler section will end. If you have seen this series, I recommend sticking around and hearing my thoughts, but if you haven't, I recommend skipping to the end so you don't get any spoilers. But, yep, let's just count up to 5 and then hop into the spoiler section. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so what I referred to before as one of his series' biggest issues is its way of connecting with the main story from Danmachi. I mentioned before that there was a series called A Certain Scientific Railgun that was a spin-off of the main series, A Certain Magical Index. And honestly, I've heard a lot of people like that series more, even though it's a spin-off. But one thing I admit it does really well is connecting it to the main story. Like, there's this whole storyline in the A Certain Magical Index series where the main character hangs out with the main character of the Railgun spin-off, and it's like this whole dramatic, like maybe 3 to 4 episode, I can't remember how many episodes it was, storyline. And in the Railgun series, they managed to actually add on to that and add more story to it without cutting any of the stuff from Index out. And it did it so well that I almost couldn't tell I was watching a different show. It just felt so good. It was written really well and was handled really well. And I love that storyline in both versions, but I definitely do feel like the Railgun version did better at expanding upon it. But this series doesn't really do that. It just kinda does its own thing, then slightly brings in the main Danmachi plot for a bit, but then immediately just leaves it out. Like, in the first storyline where Aiz meets Belle and she offers to train him, we get a bit of an idea of why she offers to do so, like how she wants to learn the secret of his power, but then we don't really get much past that. The most we get is after the training's over, she's just walking with Belle and Hestia for a bit before they end up running into the Freya Familia, warning her, hey, don't mess with Belle, stop it, don't do that. And yeah, but that part was probably the most like original thing this series did, where the rest of it they just kind of skipped through. Like, it doesn't really feel like it's a spin-off telling the story of Danmachi through Aiz and Lafia's perspective. It felt more like they were including some of the Loki Familia's adventures and then just kind of throwing bits and pieces of the main story in there here and there. It doesn't feel as satisfying when watching. Like when I remember the big Minotaur versus Belle scene, which I still love from the original, love it like a lot. I still love this scene so much. The way they kind of cut it down in this version made me kind of upset, because that's just it. They cut it down. They didn't try to add more drama to it. They didn't try to give the Loki Familia's perspectives too much. They didn't really do much time in explaining how each character felt about watching the scene. They just kind of did the same scene again, but extremely cut down, rather than adding on to it and making it feel more interesting. And just, I feel like there was so much potential to try to combine the stories here, but they just skipped through all of that just because it's part of the main series. And that's one of the biggest issues here. When I watch a spin-off that's kind of focusing on another character, I don't want to feel like I have to go back and watch the main series. Like, when I was watching Railgun and seeing the storyline where they build upon it play out, I felt like I could have just watched that story without having to watch the original. I'd still got the full experience without having to go back and watch the original. I could just watch that one and be satisfied with it. But with this series, because they try to cut it out and just make it all shimmered down, plus not even really doing too much with the character introductions, it makes it really hard, because half these characters who were barely introduced in this show, you don't know why they're there. They're just there, which if you weren't watching this after Danmachi, if you were watching this first, you'd be so confused. And that's I know it sounds like a stupid concern, but it's one of my bigger concerns, because when I think about it, it would make the most sense. It would work if the series could feel like its own thing while still building off the original. And that's my biggest gripe with this whole series, how it didn't really feel like its own story, except when they were going on their own little side adventures throughout the season, which I like those. I actually enjoy those a lot, especially episode 12 when they fought against the big final boss of the season. I thought that was a great episode. But it comes with the flaws of that we didn't just focus on that. We tried to combine the main story with it, and it kind of threw me for a loop, because then when I actually expected a scene to come into play, such as Belle and crew going down to the dungeons and finding the Loki Familia after that expedition and hanging with them, they just cut that part out. They just immediately just are back on the surface, and that's that. And so that felt a little cheated out, because I thought, oh, this could have been a better chance to like expand upon what was going on down that dungeon after Belle came down with his friends. But nope, they just skip right past that, and it's just where I want them to keep stuff in, they cut it out, and the parts I'm kind of fine with them cutting out, they keep in, and it's just this unbalanced weight of storytelling that feels like it's trying so hard to mix the two stories together, but it can't be bothered to try to write them in full. Like, it knows that you've already seen this, but it doesn't want to acknowledge that you might not have, and just instantly just skips through all of it. So if you went to this series not having watched Danmachi, you would be so lost with who Belle is as a character, who all these other characters that were introduced are. You wouldn't know any of them, and that's probably my biggest gripe with this series. I know it seems like a long rambling point, but that's probably the biggest issue I have with this series. There are a few characters, moving past that for now, there are a few characters I actually didn't like that much as well. There are some characters I actually really liked, as I mentioned. Bet was definitely an improvement. But then there were characters I kind of had issues with at first, like Lafia. She's meant to be our main eyes for this story. Not eyes, the character, but like the main vision. Like, she's meant to be the main perspective. But I found her character to be very annoying at the beginning of the series. However, she does improve about halfway through when she meets this newer character known as Philvis, who ends up having like this little story arc with her, and that was honestly probably one of the better like moments in the show. And I guess you could just say that I really found problems with her character early on. Again, she improved by the end, but it still had struggles with her. And I think the biggest reason, moving on past that for now, I think the biggest reason why I wasn't as big of a fan of this series as I was the main series probably has something to do with the fact of the overpowered characters. Like, I enjoy an overpowered character, but a group of overpowered characters can be kind of a mutt, and they can be kind of a lot. But for Danmachi, it feels like the story works best when it's like people go against a struggle they shouldn't be able to defeat, but they still stand up and fight it anyway. And that's why I liked episode 12 so much, because it actually took the time to make it seem like the threat they were going against was actually a struggle, and everyone had to try to rise up and beat it, and I loved that. It's the same thing with Belle. Seeing him surpass his limits in the series is just such a satisfying thing, where you know he shouldn't be able to win, you know he should be defeated, but he still gets back up and still fights and manages to win. That's why I like certain fights in the series where it actually felt like a struggle. But with how overpowered most of the characters are in the Loki familia, it kind of takes away a bit of the intensity from that, because you know they're probably going to win. And the fight seems like a very one-sided fight. And yeah, just pointing out here and now, I think the series could have been better. It had a lot of flaws, and in the end it was just okay. It wasn't the best thing ever, it wasn't the worst, it was just okay. And that's kind of sad, calling a Danmachi product okay, because I just really wanted to like this series. I wanted to love it as much as I do the main series, but it didn't stick as well for me. It didn't keep me invested half the time, and overall it had a lot of issues for me personally, and I wish they could have resolved those, but I don't know, this whole series just could have been better, and I wish it was. But yeah, we're at the conclusion of this video, and what are my final thoughts? It's fine. It's not the best thing ever. It definitely is a downgrade from my personal opinion of normally with the main series. It's like I usually love the main series. I think Danmachi is one of my favorite series of all time. But this spin-off it didn't do it for me. It just didn't stick with me. I didn't stay as invested as I wanted. And overall, it needed a lot of work, and definitely could have fixed a lot of areas in the story. So that's why I'd probably have to give Sword Oratoria, the Danmachi spin-off, a 6 out of 10. It was enjoyable at some parts. I liked several moments, but overall, it needed a lot of improvements, and I just wish that it was better. So yeah, that's all I have to say. Thank you all for watching. If you're new to the JGC Anime channel, don't forget to subscribe. I always welcome new anime fans to the channel, and I will see you all around. Peace!